My son Marcus looked me directly in the eye that morning and said the words as if he were simply suggesting we order takeout instead of cooking. "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place." I smiled, faintly nodded, and walked upstairs to begin packing. 3 weeks later, I was sipping champagne on a terrace in Monaco, staring at the glittering Mediterranean, while Marcus frantically called about the foreclosure notice on what he thought was his family home. But before we get there, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Geneva Walsh, though everyone has called me Jeannie since I was 7, when I boldly told the kids on the playground I could grant wishes if they were kind enough. More than 50 years later, I was still granting wishes, but never my own. That morning, I stood in the doorway of the room that had once been my sewing space, but had long since been commandeered by my daughter-in-law Isabel. She sat before my grandmother's antique vanity, lining up crystal bottles and gold compacts as if she were arranging treasures in a shop window. Her manicured fingers worked mascara across lashes with the precision of a surgeon. Isabel's every movement was deliberate, her platinum hair falling in perfect waves, her yoga outfit cut from expensive fabric that looked more suited for a runway than a morning workout. She didn't look up when she chirped "Morning, Jeannie." I replied softly, stepping into what used to be mine, feeling the sting of displacement settle once again. She began speaking casually, like it was a minor update. "Marcus and I have been talking about the living situation." My chest tightened. She turned toward the mirror, lips glistening from gloss eyes, cool and exact. "We just feel it's time for some changes. You know we need our space to grow." Her laugh was light but sharp enough to cut. Then she added the words that chilled me. "This house is Marcus's inheritance after all. Maybe it's time you found something more suitable for a woman your age. A woman my age." I was 68, still healthy, still teaching piano to neighborhood kids, still running 5 miles every other morning. But in her mouth, those words sounded like a verdict. I reminded her it was my home, but she only smiled. Technically, she was right after my husband David's sudden heart attack, years before I had signed the papers Marcus suggested for tax purposes. I hadn't thought twice about trusting my only son. I descended to the kitchen in silence, pressing the coffee maker like muscle memory. The sunlight gleamed across the butcher block, where I had made thousands of family meals, the doorframe still carrying Marcus's childhood growth marks. Moments later, he arrived, damp from the shower, his athletic clothes fitting him like a uniform. He avoided my eyes, accepted the mug I prepared just the way he had liked it since boyhood, then began gently parroting Isabel's words. "Mom, this place is too big for you. You should be somewhere easier, maybe a senior community. It's for the best." His tone was careful, almost apologetic, but the threat was unmistakable. "The house is in my name now. Legally, it's mine. I had raised this boy, poured life insurance money into his first home, sacrificed for his stability. And now, over morning coffee, he was telling me to uproot my life in 2 weeks so he and Isabel could redecorate." My throat closed, but my voice remained calm. "Of course," I said. 2 weeks should be plenty." He smiled, relieved, believing I had accepted his decision like a gift. But inside me, something steadier than anger formed clarity. If they wanted me gone, I would go. Just not in the way they expected. That afternoon, when my neighbor Helen invited me to yoga, I told her I had research to do. Research had always been my word for plans that required care. And this plan would change everything. Instead of searching for retirement communities or small apartments, I typed real estate market analysis, property values, current year, and finally, almost on a whim, cost of living Monaco. Monaco, that faraway dream David and I once joked about when bills piled high. Suddenly, it no longer felt like a joke. My house, bought for $85,000 decades earlier, was worth more than $400,000 now. And David had left me more than Marcus' new insurance investment savings, built carefully through 30 years of marriage. My future was secure, if I had the courage to claim it. By 1:00 p.m., I was on the phone with Jennifer Morrison, a sharp real estate agent who knew the neighborhood well. When she toured the house later that day, she marveled at the details I had cared for with my own hands. "We could list this at $435,000, she said. "And with this market, expect multiple offers. Enough for freedom, enough for Monaco, enough for me to start again." After she left, I sat in the kitchen where Marcus had spoken his ultimatum and whispered to myself, "I'm ready for an adventure." For the first time since David's death, I meant it. The next morning, I dressed with deliberate care. A navy dress, David once said, brought out my eyes, a pearl necklace he'd given me for our 20th anniversary. If I was going to sign away 30 years of life in this house, I would do it looking like the woman I truly was, not the burden Marcus and Isabel wanted me to believe I had become. Jennifer arrived right at 10:00 a.m., portfolio in hand, her confidence steady. At the kitchen table, where just yesterday Marcus had ordered me to find my own place, I signed the listing agreement. $435,000, a number that made my breath catch. She assured me offers would come quickly, perhaps within the week. I asked how soon we could close with a cash buyer. 3 weeks, maybe sooner. Perfect. Marcus had given me 2 weeks to disappear. I would give myself 1 month to vanish in an entirely different direction. That afternoon, I visited Richard Chen, the financial advisor, who had managed David's investments for years. His office gleamed with mahogany and glass, the sort of place that radiated stability. Richard's eyes softened with concern when I announced my plans. "Jeannie, Monaco. That's a very big decision." I told him it was mine to make, and for the first time in years, I felt the truth of that statement. He walked me through the numbers: insurance, investments, proceeds from David's business. By the time he finished, my head spun with the figure $2.1 million, not including the house sale. More than enough to live comfortably in Monaco for the rest of my life. Enough to choose myself finally. That evening, I made dinner for 3, as if nothing had changed. Chicken marsala, Marcus's favorite. He and Isabel chatted about gym sessions and weekend plans, barely noticing the effort I had put into the table. When Isabel asked if I had looked at senior communities, I smiled. "The options are exciting," I said truthfully. Marcus reached for my hand, grateful. "I knew you'd see this as an adventure. If only they knew what kind of adventure I was planning." Within days, the house had 3 showings lined up. Couples walked reverently through the rooms, admiring the garden, the hardwood floors, the details David and I had poured love into. By the end of the week, Jennifer called with 3 offers. The Hendersons, a couple in their 50s who fell in love with the garden, offered $465,000 in cash, accompanied by a heartfelt letter. I didn't hesitate. "They're the ones," I told Jennifer. "They'll love this house the way it deserves." Closing could be in 2 weeks, precisely the deadline Marcus had set for me to vanish into a retirement facility. Instead, I was signing away the house to buyers who understood its worth, freeing myself for Monaco. In the evenings, I began sorting through 30 years of belongings. Boxes marked "Keep, Donate, and Sell" lined the hallway. I chose carefully my grandmother's china cabinet, a few pieces of jewelry, David's painting of the lake where we spent our honeymoon, and the photo albums that contained our history. Everything else could stay behind. It was startling how little truly felt essential when freedom was waiting on the other side of the ocean. While Marcus and Isabel were out attending wine tastings and social events, I dismantled the life they assumed would wait for them indefinitely. The following Thursday, I sat in a conference room with the Hendersons, Jennifer, and 2 lawyers. When the final signatures were complete, I held a cashier's check for $465,000 in my hands. Money, yes, but more than that, a key to freedom. Mrs. Henderson, tears in her eyes, promised me they would cherish the garden. "You can feel the love in every detail," she said. I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. That night, I cooked one last meal in my kitchen. Just scrambled eggs and toast, but I savored every bite. Tomorrow, Marcus and Isabel would leave for a weekend trip, and by the time they returned, the house would no longer be theirs to claim. My room would be empty, my bags packed, and a letter waiting for them on the counter. In the morning, movers would load the few pieces I was taking onto a truck bound for France. My belongings would arrive by ship in 2 weeks, waiting for me in a storage facility in Nice. By then, I would be living in an apartment in Monaco Keys, already promised by an agent named Celeste, who had charmed me over a virtual tour. The wraparound terrace overlooked the Mediterranean, the harbor dotted with yachts, the palace glimmering in the distance. It was real. It was mine. At 7:00 a.m. sharp, the moving truck arrived. I directed the crew to the marked pieces, the china cabinet, the books, the painting. That's everything, I told the foreman. He nodded, paperwork in hand. When the truck pulled away, the house felt lighter, emptied of its history, ready for the Hendersons. Upstairs, I heard the shower running. Isabel beginning her usual routine, blissfully unaware of the change already set in motion. They thought they had until the end of the month. They thought I would quietly shuffle into Sunrise Manor. They had no idea that by sunset, I would be gone. The morning Isabel descended the stairs in her immaculate workout clothes, she paused mid-step, noticing the absence of familiar furniture. The china cabinet was gone, the coffee table missing the walls a little barer. "Jeannie," she called with the faintest edge of alarm. "Did you move some things?" From my chair in the living room, coffee in hand, I answered calmly, "Just some rearranging." It wasn't a lie, not really. Geography was another form of rearranging, and I had simply rearranged my life across an ocean. Marcus appeared moments later, his hair tousled from sleep, pajama pants still wrinkled. "Mom, where's all your stuff?" I looked him directly in the eye and said the words that would change everything. "Gone. To my new place." He blinked like he hadn't heard me correctly. Isabel's hand gripped his arm. "Leaving? What do you mean, leaving?" "We're supposed to tour Sunrise Manor on Monday." I shook my head. "You assumed I would. I never agreed." They were both silent, confusion chasing panic across their faces. I placed 2 envelopes on the counter, each with their names written in my careful script. "Everything you need to know is in there," I said. "But the short version, you told me to find my own place, and I did." Monaco. The silence was so deep, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the seconds. Isabel tore her letter open first, her manicured fingers trembling. Marcus followed, scanning the words with growing disbelief. $2 million, he read aloud, his voice barely audible. "Plus the house sale," I nodded. $465,000 after Jennifer's commission. "I closed yesterday. The Hendersons will be moving in soon." Isabel's face went pale under her flawless makeup. "You can't sell this house. It's Marcus's inheritance." "It was in his name," I corrected. "But legally still mine to sell." "And I sold it." Marcus sank into the wingback chair that had been David's favorite, staring at me as though I'd sprouted wings. "But where will we live?" The question revealed everything. Not where would I live, not how would I survive. Only what would become of them now that their free ride had ended. "You're capable adults," I said evenly. "Good jobs, good credit. You'll figure it out." Isabel's voice cracked. "You can't just leave us homeless. We've been saving for furniture, for plans." I tilted my head. "Saving. While you lived here, rent-free, eating food I bought, using utilities I paid for." They exchanged guilty glances. Their savings had been built on my sacrifice, and they had planned to discard me without a thought. "This is insane," Marcus said, pacing the room. "Mom, you can't move to Monaco. You don't speak French. You don't know anyone. What if something happens? His voice trembled between anger and fear. Then at least it will happen while I'm living my life, I said, instead of waiting to die in a facility you picked out for me. Isabel clasped her hands, mascara beginning to smudge. Sunrise Manor is lovely activities, trips to the theater, organized fun for people whose families have no use for them. I cut in gently. No thank you. A taxi horn honked outside. Right on schedule. My bags were already loaded. Marcus followed me to the door, desperation replacing arrogance. Mom, please, not like this. Don't go. I looked at him one last time, memorizing the face of the boy I once held through thunderstorms. I love you, Marcus. I always will. But I won't be treated like a burden. Not anymore. Isabel's tears turned sharp. We'll change, Jeannie. We'll do better. You'll change because you have to, I said, stepping onto the porch. But I won't stay to be your lesson. I want happiness. The taxi driver, a kind-faced woman, opened the door. Airport? She asked. International terminal, I confirmed. Behind me, Marcus and Isabel stood in shock, clutching their letters, the future they assumed unraveling before their eyes. Ahead of me stretched freedom. At the airport, everything moved swiftly. Passport boarding pass security lines. By 4:00 p.m., I was in seat 2, a first-class glass of champagne in hand. The flight attendant smiled. Celebrating something special. Freedom, I answered, and meant it. As the plane lifted, I pressed my face to the window. Roads, rooftops, the house where I'd spent 3 decades, all shrinking to a pattern on the earth. Somewhere below, Marcus and Isabel were discovering the full weight of their entitlement. But that was their burden now, not mine. 8 hours later, the descent began. The Mediterranean coastline came into view, bluer than any color I had ever seen, the beaches golden, the rooftops glowing red. The man beside me murmured, "Beautiful, isn't it perfect?" I said. At Nice airport, everything was effortless. My passport stamped my luggage, waiting a taxi driver, cheerful and talkative. First time in Monaco, he asked. First time choosing myself, I replied. He laughed, nodding as though he understood. And when the car rounded the hill, and Monaco unfurled below harbor, glittering with yachts, pink and gold buildings climbing the hillside, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The building on Avenue St. Charles was more magnificent in person than in the photographs Celeste had shown me. Belle Époque details, wrought iron balconies, marble-floored halls. The concierge, Henri, greeted me by name and handed me keys as though welcoming royalty. Welcome to Monaco, Madame Walsh. If you need anything, I am here. His smile was genuine, his English impeccable. I thanked him and took the small elevator to the 4th floor. When the door opened, I stepped into a sunlit apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and herringbone floors that gleamed in the morning light. Elegant antique furniture blended with modern pieces in shades of cream and gold. But it was the terrace that stole my breath. I pushed open French doors and walked onto the wraparound balcony, the Mediterranean stretching endless and blue before me, the harbor alive with yachts, the palace perched proudly above. I stood there for a long time, the sea breeze lifting my hair, breathing in air that tasted like salt and possibility. Inside, I unpacked the few belongings I had carried in my luggage photo albums, David's painting, my grandmother's small framed picture, and placed them around the apartment like anchors. My other possessions would arrive by ship in 2 weeks. Until then, this place was already mine. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Mom, please call. We need to talk. I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. We had already talked. He told me to find my own place. I had done exactly that. There was nothing more to explain. The first days unfolded like a dream. Mornings began with coffee on the terrace, watching the harbor come alive. Fishermen unloading their catch children on their way to school. the city waking under the Mediterranean sun. I wandered through narrow streets lined with shops, my halting French improving each day. Madame Dubois from 3A, a retired professor with sharp eyes and boundless energy, took me under her wing. She invited me to her weekly salons where locals and expatriates debated politics, art, and philosophy over cheese and wine. "You are brave," she told me after our first long conversation. "Not many have the courage to choose themselves at our age." Hearing the phrase, "our age," from a 74-year-old who still traveled alone to archaeological digs in Greece felt like a compliment instead of an insult. I filled afternoons with long walks along the coastal path between Monaco and Cap d'El, the sea rolling endlessly at my side. Markets brimmed with fresh produce, olives, flowers, and bread that smelled like heaven. In the evenings, I discovered small restaurants where owners greeted regulars like family. One in particular became a favorite, a tucked-away bistro where the chef served only 4 dishes a night, each perfected with care. He began saving me a small table on the terrace where I ate alone, but never felt lonely. Back in the States, silence followed. 2 frantic phone calls from Marcus during the first week went unanswered. An email arrived in February full of apologies, explanations, and promises to do better. I read it once, closed the computer, and let it sit unanswered. In March, a birthday card arrived 2 weeks late with a generic message about hoping I was well. I placed it in a drawer. It felt like an artifact from a past life I no longer belonged to. My life was building itself day by day into something new. I joined a watercolor class taught by a British artist who had moved to France decades earlier. She was in her 70s, paint on her hands, laughter in her voice, and she told me, "Best decision I ever made, selling everything and starting over." Took me 65 years to realize no one else was responsible for my happiness. Her words sank deep into me. They echoed every morning as I brewed my coffee and stepped out onto the terrace. The Mediterranean spread before me like an endless promise. One evening, just as the sun was dropping behind the hills, my phone rang. The number was international, but unfamiliar. I answered the way I had learned to hear Geneva Walsh. There was a pause, and then a voice I knew better than my own. "Mom." Thin, strained, carrying both distance and desperation. "Marcus." For a moment I said nothing, only listened to the quiet static between us. "Hello, Marcus," I replied finally. His voice cracked. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your number changed. I had to hire someone to track you down." Hire someone. The word struck me. My own son had resorted to strangers to reach me. He exhaled sharply. "You're in Monaco? I need to talk. Things have been difficult since you left." I sat at my small kitchen table, the harbor lights shimmering beyond the windows. "What's happened?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. There was a pause, heavy and long. "Isabel left," he said at last. The words fell flat, predictable somehow, like a script I had already read. I closed my eyes, waiting for him to continue. 6 weeks ago, Marcus continued, his voice breaking in and out across the line. "Isabel packed her things and went back to her parents. She said she couldn't handle the stress anymore. She said our situation was too much." Our situation. I heard what those words really meant. They had been forced to pay rent, to manage utilities, to live within their means for the first time in their adult lives. And Isabel, who once treated me like clutter in her perfect house, had no interest in a life scaled down to fit reality. I said only, "I'm sorry, Marcus." And I meant it. Not sorry that she was gone, but sorry that he was learning painfully what I already knew: people reveal who they are when life stops being easy. "I don't understand, Mom," he went on, his voice climbing. "What did I do that was so terrible you had to disappear to another continent? You've always been there for me, and then suddenly you were gone." His question surprised me with its honesty. I expected anger, manipulation, guilt. Instead, I heard confusion, maybe even regret. "Marcus," I said gently, "you told me to find my own place. You told me this house was yours now that I needed somewhere more appropriate for my age. You researched facilities for me. You made plans to redecorate before I was even gone. What choice did you think you left me?" Silence followed, thick and raw. I could almost hear his breathing uneven, like a child caught in a lie. "We thought we were helping," he whispered at last. "We told ourselves it was for your well-being. But it was selfish. I see that now." I leaned against the terrace railing, the sea stretched out before me, reflecting morning light. "You were trying to clear me out of your way?" I said, my voice calm, not cruel. "There's a difference between care and convenience." He didn't argue. For the first time in years, my son didn't push back. He sounded smaller, humbled. "I miss you," he admitted. "I keep realizing how much of my life was built on the assumption you'd always be there. I took it for granted. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I need to try." Forgiveness. I rolled the word around in my mind. Months ago, it had burned my throat to even consider it. But standing on my terrace breathing air salted with freedom, I realized forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. It was something I had already given myself. "Marcus," I asked carefully, "what would forgiveness look like to you?" He let out a broken laugh. "A conversation like this, a chance to apologize, to tell you that I'm proud of you, even if it scares me to death that you're out there on your own." Proud, a word I hadn't expected. "You see me as brave?" I asked. "I see you as someone I never understood," he answered. "Someone stronger, smarter, more independent than I ever gave credit for." My throat tightened, remembering the boy who used to slip into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching me with tiny hands. That boy had grown into a man who had treated me like an obligation. But now, I heard the echo of the child in his voice again. "Marcus, I said I don't need your apology to be happy. I am happy. For the first time since your father died, I have a life that belongs to me. I walk the harbor every morning. I paint. I learn French. I sit with people who see me as a whole person. I am not waiting to die. I am living." On the other end of the line, he was crying, his voice unsteady. "If you ever came back, would you want to see me?" I closed my eyes. "If I ever came back, Marcus, seeing you would be the only reason." We spoke for half an hour more. He told me about his one-bedroom apartment, how he was cooking for himself, how lonely it felt without Isabel's constant chatter. He admitted he was in therapy trying to understand why he had treated me as disposable. I told him about my classes, my friends, the markets, the sea. When we said goodbye, I felt lighter. Not because everything was healed, but because something new had begun. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. He had learned that love without respect is nothing. I had learned that I no longer needed his approval to claim my life. After the call, I sat on the terrace long after the harbor lights blinked on. A text from Helen arrived back home. "How are you, world traveler? The neighborhood misses you." I typed back, "Thriving, learning French, learning how to be me at 68. That night, I went to my favorite bistro. The owner greeted me with a warm grin. "Madame Geneva, something special tonight. Fresh langoustine in saffron sauce." I savored it slowly, thinking of Marcus, of Isabel, of the house now blooming with the Hendersons' care. Everything had shifted, none of it as planned, but perhaps exactly as needed. 6 months after that call, Marcus came to see me. He had saved for months to afford the trip, booking a modest hotel near the port. When I met him at the airport in Nice, I hardly recognized the man walking toward me. He was thinner, his expression more cautious, his arrogance replaced with something quieter, humility. During his first evening here, we sat on my terrace with a simple dinner of fish and vegetables from the market. He looked out over the Mediterranean, his voice soft. "I can't believe this is your life, Mom." I smiled. Some days, I can't believe it either. But it feels real now. It feels like home. In the days that followed, I showed him my world. We walked the coastal path, where the sea shimmered endlessly, visited the market stalls, where vendors now greeted me in French, and shared wine at Madame Dubois' salon, where conversations spun into the night. He listened carefully, asking questions about my classes, my routines, my friends. For the first time in years, Marcus wasn't dismissive. He was curious. He was learning who I was apart from being his mother. On our fourth day, as we shared coffee at a cafe near the harbor, he told me quietly, "I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could treat you like you didn't matter." I think I inherited Dad's sense of entitlement without his work ethic. I confused love with ownership. I didn't see you as a whole person. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's a hard truth to face, Marcus." He nodded, but I had to. Isabel's gone for good. The divorce is final. She loved our lifestyle more than she loved me. And when it disappeared, so did she. I thought I'd fall apart, but I realized I'm still here. I can rebuild, and I want to rebuild with honesty. That week, something shifted between us. We weren't mother and dependent child anymore. We were two adults, each owning our choices, each learning to meet the other with respect. On his last night, we ate at my favorite bistro, the one where the chef served only 4 dishes each evening. Marcus stumbled through ordering in French, drawing laughter from the staff. But when the food arrived, he raised his glass of wine and said, "To my mother, the bravest woman I know." For the first time, his words didn't feel like manipulation. They felt true. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. At the gate, he hugged me tightly. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching me that love doesn't mean accepting poor treatment, for showing me people our parents' age aren't waiting to die, for proving it's never too late to choose yourself." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you for learning," I whispered back. And then he was gone, swallowed by the terminal carrying new lessons and a chance at becoming the man I always hoped he'd be. Afterward, I returned to my terrace, the harbor alive with morning light. On my laptop, I opened an email from a real estate agent about a new apartment for sale, modern, spacious, with panoramic views of the sea and mountains. It was expensive, yes, but well within my means. I stared at the photos, imagining my grandmother's cabinet in the living room, my books on the shelves mornings filled with light and freedom. For the first time since David died, I thought not in temporary terms, but permanent ones. Monaco was no longer just an escape. It was my home. That night, I wrote to Helen back home. "What if I told you I was thinking of staying here forever?" She replied instantly, "About damn time, Geneva. When can I visit?" I laughed out loud, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I was no longer waiting for anyone's permission. In the months since I had left, I discovered a truth I wished I had known earlier in life. Our children are not our caretakers. They are not our destiny. They are their own people, flawed and fragile, learning their way through the world. And we are more than parents, more than spouses, more than the roles others place on us. We are whole people with dreams that deserve attention no matter our age. Marcus once told me to find my own place. He thought he was dismissing me, but it turned out to be the greatest gift of all. I found my place, and I found myself. Weeks after Marcus's visit, I stood on the terrace of the apartment I was ready to buy, a glass of wine in hand, the Mediterranean stretching before me, in hues of silver and blue. The building was new, elegant, with a rooftop garden and sweeping views of both the sea and the mountains. It was more expensive than anything I had ever imagined owning. But as I signed the preliminary paperwork with Celeste, my agent, I realized it wasn't about the price. It was about finally claiming a space that was mine, not borrowed, not inherited, not dictated by anyone else's convenience. A place that reflected the woman I had become. Helen called that evening from back home, her voice bubbling with excitement. "So, Geneva, are you really doing this? Buying in Monaco? Making it permanent?" I looked around the apartment, its wide windows, its promise of mornings filled with light, its silence rich with possibility, and I smiled. "Yes, Helen, I am," she laughed. "It's about time you put yourself first. Book me a ticket. I want to see it with my own eyes." For the first time, I could hear not envy, but admiration in her tone, and I realized how powerful it is to live a life that inspires others to be brave too. That night, I walked home along the harbor, the city glowing under 1,000 lights, the air scented with salt and jasmine. The years of sacrifice, the quiet compliance, the constant giving without asking, those were chapters of my life, not the whole book. At 68, I had discovered that life doesn't shrink because your children grow up or because your spouse is gone. It only shrinks if you stop believing in your own right to joy. I had been told to find my own place, and I had. In one of the most beautiful places on earth, surrounded by people who reminded me daily that age is not a sentence, but a freedom. Sitting on my new balcony, I thought about Marcus. He was trying slowly, piecing together a new life, carrying lessons learned the hard way. I hoped he would remember not just the shock of my leaving, but the truth behind it, that love without respect is not love at all. Perhaps one day when he was older, he would thank me not for the sacrifices I had made, but for the courage I had shown in refusing to disappear quietly. And perhaps that would be enough. I raised my glass to the sea, to the stars, to the memory of David, who had once joked about a little place in Monaco. "We made it, love," I whispered. The waves seemed to answer steady and sure, carrying his laugh back to me across the years. My life was not over. It was just beginning. And the greatest lesson of all was simple. It is never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can find it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose yourself even when others didn't understand? I'd love to hear your story.